told your friend you're not okay.
That afternoon, as the airport entered its quiet hours and activity slowly subsided, the atmosphere suddenly changed when a figure appeared without a sound: Jungkook. There were no big announcements, no schedules leaked to the media, no sudden posters that usually cause the entertainment world to go crazy in a matter of minutes. It was precisely because everything was so quiet that the moment felt even more important. In the silence hanging in the air, Jungkook's silhouette flashed by like a sudden scene from a movie, and every step he took seemed to carry an unspoken message that was immediately felt by all his fans. His arrival that afternoon was different, very different. It wasn't a busy morning, nor a night full of lights and cameras, but a time that usually didn't bring any surprises. Yet, among the flow of people starting to go home, Jungkook walked with such deliberate steps. Simple clothes, a focused posture, a presence without the desire to be seen. There was no energy of "I'm on vacation" or "I'm free." Instead, the energy that emerged was that of someone on a mission. Someone who wanted to accomplish something without the spotlight, someone who knew exactly what he was pursuing. The army members who happened to be there didn't react with the usual commotion. There were no screams, no excitement that usually erupted when his face appeared. Instead, there was a brief pause, an odd silence that only happens when their collective instincts sense something unusual. Glances were exchanged, and slowly comments began to emerge: "This is different. This is serious. Something's up." The army recognized Jungkook more than anyone else, and they knew that this kind of attitude was always the first sign of a big movement. In the rapid-fire whispers flowing through the timeline, one name appeared repeatedly: Germany. Not as big as America, not as popular as Japan, not as viral as Paris or London, but precisely because it was rarely mentioned, the name sounded much heavier. Germany was not a center of sensation, not a stage for drama, not a place to seek instant spotlight. Germany was a workspace. A place where big projects are born without much fanfare. A country where music is treated as precision, not a trend. Where cross-industry collaborations are not announced with great fanfare, but are worked on slowly until they are perfect. And when Jungkook's name is paired with Germany, the atmosphere becomes more intense, more serious, more meaningful. If we trace his movement so far, everything is clear. Jungkook is the type who disappears when something is being built, the type who is silent right before the world is shaken by his new work. He never asks the public to be ready. He never makes empty promises. He just leaves, works, and returns with something that leaves people speechless. This isn't a habit, it's a rhythm. The rhythm of an artist who believes in achievement, not promises. In results, not rhetoric. In quiet work, not manufactured noise. And that afternoon, that rhythm was felt again. The rhythm that the army recognized as the beginning of something that would change the course of the story. There was no clarification, no explanation, not even a denial of the rumors that were beginning to spread. But it was precisely because of the silence that the army remained calm. They had seen this pattern too many times before. If Jungkook didn't speak, it meant the time wasn't right yet. If he appeared without a sound, it meant he was setting the stage. This trust wasn't blind, but built on years of consistency. Jungkook didn't need to speak loudly to move the world, he just needed to walk through the airport in the afternoon, and everything changed. Perhaps our questions all this time have been wrong. Maybe it's not about where he's going, not, is he going to Germany, but, what is he preparing? Because what matters is not his destination, but his long-term goals. Jungkook is at a stage in his career where he no longer needs to prove anything. The numbers follow him. Recognition accompanies him. The world has decided, he is one of the biggest global icons of his generation. What he's chasing now isn't popularity, but legacy. Something that remains long after trends have changed. Meanwhile, in a few weeks, there may be a surprising announcement. Perhaps an international project, a major collaboration, a work that has been quietly in progress all this time. Or maybe we will only understand the meaning of this afternoon months or even years later, when everything starts to come together like pieces of a puzzle finally forming a complete picture. And when that time comes, we will say softly but confidently, "Oh, that's why. That's why that afternoon felt different." And just as the world began to talk about that afternoon as a moment that was strange but important, the story unfolded in a more subtle yet increasingly suspicious way. That night, some fans reported that certain flight schedules to Europe had suddenly disappeared from the public list, something unusual unless there were VIP passengers or activities that were deliberately kept secret. A few hours later, blurry photos from the international terminal began to surface, not photos of Jungkook, but photos of airline security staff who seemed more active than usual, as if they were preparing for the arrival of someone who had to be guarded without attracting attention. And even though no one mentioned Jungkook's name directly, the atmosphere felt like a continuation of the previous afternoon, a new chapter that reinforced suspicions that this trip was not an ordinary one. The army, who had previously been silent and waiting, now began to sense a familiar pattern, a pattern of big movements that always began with silence. What made it even more interesting was a small conversation in the European music community that suddenly discussed the arrival of an Asian artist for a secret studio project, something that rarely happened without a reason. There was no confirmation, no names, but the timing was too close to Jungkook's appearance at the airport earlier. It was too coincidental to be considered a coincidence. Top Kpop notes that several German producers known for working on global projects suddenly uploaded studio visuals with ambiguous captions about a week of creation, and as usual, the army began connecting the dots. Could Jungkook be flying in for more than just a recording session? Is he planning an international collaboration? Or a cross-genre project requiring high-level secrecy? Whatever is happening, it all feels like a series of precisely orchestrated moves. He appears in a quiet moment, walks without much fanfare. Then the world is suddenly filled with subtle signals in various places that point to one likely possibility, that something is being created. And at this point, it's no longer about whether he flew to Germany or not, but about why the entire global music ecosystem suddenly moved in unison. Because this is what makes that afternoon even more meaningful. The silent departure is not just a change of location, but the first step in a bigger process, a foundation being laid for something that could be a turning point in the global music scene this year. And while the world is still trying to guess, the army can only smile, because this pattern is all too familiar. Every time Jungkook disappears in silence, he returns with something that is not only big, but changes the landscape. That afternoon may have seemed simple, even ordinary, but every hour after that began to form a new shadow, a shadow of a movement that was growing, step by step, quietly, but surely. A sign that Jungkook's story hasn't reached its peak. On the contrary, he's preparing the most ambitious chapter of his life, and that afternoon, which seemed so quiet, was just the prologue to something much bigger waiting to be revealed.
I guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I